by the governor, not elected by the people. And the governor himself signed off on this deal. That's their definition of state-led. There was no public debate. There was no parent involvement. Our teachers don't get to say anything about it. That's not truly state-led. Semantics. So now we have a system that's very top-down. You've got the United States Department of Education, Arnie Duncan and Company, pulling the strings here. Then the State Department of Ed via a 9-member appointed board that's not accountable to the people. Local district can't do much of anything at all. They have to do whatever the state tells them to do. And look where parents are. It's frustrating. Intentions are everything. And so we're going to take a look at the people who are pushing this, the people who are funding this. This is very corporate-led. There are some big-name corporations behind this. It's very important to look at their intentions and to look at their philosophy on education, because that's going to tell you what their goals are, right? In 2009, when the race to the top was being announced, MSNBC, who loves them some Common Core, the National Broadcasting Company has actually created a couple of offshoots specifically for education reform and Common Core. It's called NBC Learns and Education Nation. You can look those up online and look. Education Nation has a summit every year, which is not really, it's not a summit like you would think it is. It's more like a panel discussion. But they have this summit every year, and they talk about Common Core, and they've got a website set up to help all the parents and teachers transition to Common Core, because it's all sunshine and apples, so they just love some Common Core. Okay? So they aired a commercial starring Melissa Harris Perry. And let's see what they have to say about the role of education and the role of public school.
We have never invested as much in public education as we should have, because we've always had kind of a private notion of children. Your kid is yours and totally your responsibility. We haven't had a very collective notion of these are our children. So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families, and recognize that kids belong to whole communities. Once it's everybody's responsibility and not just the households, then we start making better investments.
My kids belong to me. My children do not belong to the state. They do not belong to the community. They belong to me. If that's the case, Melissa, I'm calling you when the baby wakes up at 2 a.m.
We have never invested as much in...
Next. Oh, mouse. Patrick, come help me. Thank you. All right, now let's listen to what Arnie Duncan has to say about education. Remember, this is all the propaganda message. This is where they're trying to condition parents and teachers on how to think, to be accepting of this reform. Okay? This is Arnie Duncan, U.S. Secretary of Education, in an interview with Charlie Rose in 2009. This is his vision for education. Oh, no it's not. Patrick, help me. This mouse will not, the mouse does not like me.
I think our schools should be open 12, 13, 14 hours a day. So it's not just lengthening.
So 8 to 8 or something like that?
Yes, and let me tell you, not just lengthening hours in the school day, but a wide variety of after-school activities. At home, we attached healthcare clinics to about 24 of our schools. Where schools truly become the centers of the community, great things happen. So I think we need the schools open much longer hours.
So keep them open 12 hours a day, 12 months a year.
Yes.
12 hours a day, 12 months a year.
And I would go to 6 or 7 days a week, not just Monday through Friday.
7 days a week.
Schools
So the school becomes a center of community life.
When the school becomes a center of community life, great things are going to happen for those families and great things are going to happen to those
Tell me
children.
why that hasn't happened before.
I'll tell you why that hasn't happened before. it's un-American and kind of illegal. So here we have Arnie Duncan saying that he believes that our government schools should now become the center of community. When you listen to the entire length of that interview, not only does he talk about putting healthcare clinics in there, but he wants families to come up there and dine together. He wants us to have all 3 meals at our schools. He wants all of their extracurricular activities to be in the school. He wants a government entity to replace the family unit. This is the course we are heading down. These are the people who are leading education. And you know, when you read, there was an article that I stumbled on the other day where he was talking about this very thing. He did another interview in 2009, and the case that he made, at the end, he says, parents are going to go for this. This is what they want because they need it. Because most of our families are divorced. So we have single-parent households now where they have to work all day and they need somewhere to send their kids where they don't have to pay for daycare. This is going to be music to America's ears because they can drop their kids off at 7 o'clock in the morning. They don't have to pick them up until 7 o'clock at night. He was making the case that America wants government to raise their children. This is a huge identity crisis for America. This is huge. Do we want to be part of that? Okay. Let me hand you over to Grace Lewis. She is the chair of Arkansas Against Common Core, and she's going to take you through another section where we get into how it is more than standards. Grace.
All right. When I started studying this over a year ago, before I started Arkansas Against Common Core, at first I just started with the standards themselves because my son was having trouble with the math. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to pull my kids out of public school and that will be it. I won't have to deal with this. But the more I continued to study, I realized, like Karen has said, that this is a complete reform package. And I couldn't just sit back and not fight this. This is more than just standards. And the way it came about was unconstitutional. They bypassed parents, they bypassed Congress. They did not go through the routes they should have gone through. That upset me because I believe in our Constitution. And then, just like Karen said, studying the philosophies of the people behind this, you realize this is anti-American and this is anti-family. This is an attack on our families. When can you have family time if your children are at school 12 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week? The family unit is the basic unit of society. It's the backbone of society. If we do not stand up for that and fight for that, society will falter. So we're going to get into how they say that the federal government was not involved in this at all. So who is behind Common Core? You have private interest groups. You have the National Governors Association, the Council of Chief State School Officers, and a chief. NGA basically is a non-elected body where our governors get together, and not all governors are part of it. Some of the governors said it wasn't worth taxpayer money for me to belong to this, but they still can't get out of it. They're still part of the NGA. The CCSSO is our state superintendents from each state, and ACHIEVE is who authored and developed the standards, and on their board of directors are some of the governors. So it's kind of all not the best. This letter to Arnie Duncan was written back in April 2013. Several members of Congress got together and they said, hey, you bypassed us. You didn't get any input from us. You changed federal data and disbursement policies, and we feel like this is a one-size-fits-all policy that does not address the individual needs of each state. Because each state's different. We aren't going to do the same things California is doing. And so they had issue with that. The Republican National Committee came out and said that they see Common Core for what it is, and it's an inappropriate overreach to standardize and control the education of our children. So how was the federal government involved? They first started with the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund. And in order for you to even sign on to Race to the Top, you first had to sign the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund. And we got money through that, and that's where you see those 4 pillars of reform. They're listed in there. Then, through Race to the Top, which is part of the stimulus bill, they had $4.35 billion that they said, here's some money to all the states. If you want this money, you need to sign on. But it's a race. Not everybody's going to get part of the money. We did not get part of the money here in Arkansas because there were things that we didn't get points for. We didn't expand charter schools, things like that would have been voted by our legislators, so it wasn't even in session at the time. With the Race to the Top, the most heavily weighted thing was a set of common standards. And the federal government likes to say, well, we didn't say you had to use Common Core. But in order for the states, they would have had to have gotten together within just a couple of months and come up with standards that were superior to the standards that they supposedly had at the time. None of the states are going to do that. They're just going to sign on to Common Core, which was already there. I mean, they probably thought that was pretty harmless. And what they could get was better because they could get either money, but the biggest thing I think a lot of states were the waivers from No Child Left Behind. And it didn't get us out of everything with No Child Left Behind, just some of the worst parts of No Child Left Behind. Because when you start to get into No Child Left Behind, there's parts that you have to reach 100%, which is not even attainable. They also threatened to take away Title I money, and then this is where it gets kind of fuzzy. They fund the NGA and the CCSSO. So our federal tax dollars are funding these private interest groups that we cannot be part of. Like when the NGA meet and the CCSSO meet, we cannot go in and sit in on these meetings. They are not subject to sunshine laws. So those are the laws that basically show transparency. So we know what, if you want to go to the Capitol, you can see what's going on, what our legislators are voting on, who voted for what. There's none of that with the NGA or the CCSSO. You don't know, there's no minutes for us to read. There's no, well, who voted for this? Who thought this was a good idea? This kind of goes in, Patrick made this slide, of who funds what. So you can see that the federal government, and we'll get into Bill Gates here in a little bit. Bill Gates is very much pro-Common Core and funds quite a bit of stuff. But the federal government, like I said, funds the NGA, the CCSSO, and they gave money to a chief who wrote the standards. They did the Race to the Top, and they did not put any money in curriculum because, like we've said, that is completely against the law, and they know that. They funded the professional development, and they also funded, through grants, the longitudinal data systems. This slide right here shows how much money the federal government has been spending on education. And as you can see, that blue is the spending and how it's just continuing to rise and rise. The other lines are our test scores. We haven't had any changes in test scores with all of that spending. And so here they are, the ones that have gotten us to where we are in education, and they're saying that they're going to come in and save it. So we're going to talk about how they say it's state-led. This is David Coleman speaking in this video. Oops.
One of them is the Common Core standards. And most people, when trying to understand how that could have happened, right? In other words, how could it be that in a country locked against itself that something broke in this way? When I was involved in convincing governors and others around this country to adopt these standards, it was not Obama likes them. Do you think that would have gone well with the Republican crowd? Shouldn't you instead be meeting with the Council of Chief State School Officers? Those of you who say that probably have not attended as many of those meetings as I have. And they might wonder whether we had a legion of talented lobbyists or friends in the right places. Tom, who knows me well, knows how pathetic the beginnings of the Common Core standard movement were. Think of a napkin. Think of a few people in a room with an idea.
So does that sound state-led to you? A napkin and a few people in a room with an idea? I don't think so. State-led to me would be the people in the states calling for that. had a legislator ask me, well, why aren't parents, I'm not hearing from parents or teachers or anything, what's the big deal? I'm like, well, did you hear from them when they were asking for national standards? No. Why is it that we have to come and, debate why this isn't what we want? We never wanted it in the first place. Who did? That's what you need to ask yourself. Who was behind this? What are their philosophies, and why do they want this? So the race to the top, I kind of already talked about a little bit. It came out in November 2009, and we had to submit it in January 2010. Our legislature was not in session at the time, so they couldn't vote on this. This did not go through proper channels. It was just the governor and the state school board. In March of 2010, the standards were actually released. So we signed on to something that we didn't even know what it was. We hadn't read the standards, they hadn't even been released. There were 3 phases to Race to the Top. So now it's time to sign on to the second phase. That was in June 2nd that the state school board met to review the standards. And then they signed on July approving the standards. So it took them 1 month. Do you think that they really vetted every standard, looked at every standard, said, is this what's best for Arkansas? Or do you think it was more about getting No Child Left Behind waivers and money? So if this was truly state-led, there wouldn't be a copyright. The NGA and the CCSSO have the copyright on these standards, and they say that you can't take anything away from them. You can't change them, you can't do anything different. You can add, if you want to add up, 10, 15%, that's fine, but a lot of schools aren't going to do that, and if so, it's going to be things like cursive, stuff like that that's not in the standards. If it was state-led, we would have signed on to it without having been baited, coerced. We wouldn't have needed the No Child Left Behind waivers or any of those things. We would have wanted it. And there would have been no need for millions to be spent. I mean, in Arkansas alone, it's estimated to cost us $139 million. Nationally, $16 billion. Of our taxpayer dollars on something that we didn't get to vote on, our legislators in the state didn't get to vote on, and Congress didn't get to vote on it. Something this big as national standards should have gone through Congress. And our teachers would feel free to voice their concerns. I mean, a lot of them will tell us, well, I'm not supposed to really talk about Common Core. They tell us in our meetings not to say anything negative about it, just to stay neutral or don't say anything at all. All right, Patrick.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the assessments and data collection. So Kara mentioned them earlier. You have 2 assessment consortiums, the Smarter Balance Consortium and the PARC Consortium, or there's the really long name for it, but we'll just call it PARC from here forward. Arkansas is a member of the PARC Consortium, so I'll mainly focus on that tonight. So basically the PARC assessment, it'll be an online assessment. So it is obviously more costly and more subject to technical difficulties, if you will. Dr. Gary Thompson, child psychologist from Utah, states that it is cognitive child abuse. In Arkansas, because we adopted tests, the evaluation system for teachers, these test scores are tied to teacher evaluation. And there's also data issues tied to these tests. So to give you a little overview as to how PARC works, supposedly a group of states got together and came up with this idea, and with Smarter Balance, 2 groups of states got together and came up with the same idea of doing these next generation assessments. And with Race to the Top, there was a separate competition for states to get together and come up with an idea and receive up to $150 million in Race to the Top funding. So this is federal tax dollars that's funding the development of these tests. So PARC was one of the consortiums that won the grant. So they got about $150 million to be paid out over a few years. And so they got together and formed this consortium of states. So there is a nonprofit organization at the center of the consortium that runs the day-to-day operations. They have a DC office, things like that. So they've been working on this test for about 3 years now. And, well, let me back up. To get the money, there was a cooperative agreement, basically a contract to get the money. So here's some highlights from this cooperative agreement. It's about 20 pages long. So the grantee partners provide timely and complete access to any and all data collected at the state level to the U.S. Department of Education or its designated program monitors, technical assistant providers, or research partners. This raises a huge red flag because this little one-paragraph section in that 20-page document really opens up a lot of loopholes for just about anyone under the sun to be granted access to this data collected through these tests. Pretty much anyone these days can call themselves an education researcher and take advantage of this. Another requirement of this grant was to produce all student-level data in a manner consistent with an industry-recognized, open license interoperability standard that is approved by the department. That's a lot of words and probably doesn't make sense, but it will in a minute, so just hold on to that. So then this is the last page of that document, the signature block. So you can see the 4 people that signed this document, 2 people from the State Department of Education, 2 people from the Florida Department of Education. Florida was kind of the head of the consortium, but has recently dropped out of the consortium. So 4 people signed this document agreeing to those terms. None of them from Arkansas, none of them represent us. So remember all those fancy words from that second block, that data must be produced in a manner consistent with an industry standard. Well, this is where that comes in. This is from an event that was held at the White House a few years ago called the Education Data Palooza. Sounds like a party, but it's basically where CEOs from a bunch of education companies get together. They all come to the White House, rub shoulders with the Department of Education, show off the things they're working on. So this is the CEO of a company called eScholar Incorporated, who develops this software that basically can take data from a test, a Common Core Aligned assessment such as PART, and it can recommend career pathways based on your test results. So we'll let him brag about their software.
We're doing. I want to talk too, we're pulling data from everywhere. You name it, having open standards is important. We get data from thousands, tens of thousands of different places. And being able to do that fast and do it clean is incredibly important for us. Just want to talk about one thing here that's important data that we need to be able to pull in to make all this work. This Common Core data about skills. I know we're really running out of time. We're not going to go into it in detail. Now, when we surveyed students, not a single one of them actually cared about, never asked us about the Common Core.
Because we didn't
we
know.
looked at it and said, all right, I'm not so worried about that. Because how many people said, if you ask them, do you care whether or not you have TCP/IP on your smartphone?
Because
They probably
they don't
say,
know.
no, I don't. But you do care. This is the glue